Hi booktube, Aaron here. Hope you're doing very well. Today I'm going to be doing the Beauty in Books tag. It's a tag that was created in collaboration. Um, so it was created by two channels, To Readers It May Concern and Emily from the Linguist Library. Both amazing channels, and I was very kindly tagged by To Readers It May Concern. So I'll have both of their videos and their channels down in the description. And before I get started, I'll quickly add that if you're at all interested in the work and the life of Fernando Pessoa, who's a really curious and really interesting writer, I would definitely direct you over to Emily's video, because I feel like if you haven't really heard of him, or you kind of have, and you're intrigued, that'd be a great place for you to go. So let's jump into the tag. It's all about beauty in books, different ways you can see beauty in books. That the tag will really explain itself. The first prompt is beauty in concept, and there are all kinds of different novels I could have gone with, or all kinds of memoirs or works of travel writing, whether straightforward or experimental. I decided to go with one of my favourite short story writers. I think like like Kafka, the premise, the concept of the whole thing is sort of part of the fun, part of what makes it so exceptional and interesting. And with this writer in particular, so sometimes all there is to the story is the premise, is the concept. And that's Jorge Luis Borges, one of my all-time favourite writers. And I've realised I often bring him up, and yet I feel like I've never done a very good job of explaining exactly what it is that I love about him. And so I'll try to do my best. And to do that, I'll start off by reading out a very short story of his. It's less than a page. Here it is, just one paragraph, called On Exactitude in Science. And yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this story a lot recently. On Exactitude in Science. In that empire, the art of cartography attained such perfection that the map of a single province occupied the entirety of a city, and the map of the empire the entirety of a province. In time, those unconscionable maps no longer satisfied, and the cartographers' guilds struck up a map of the empire whose size was that of the empire, and which coincided point for point with it. The following generations, who were not so fond of the study of cartography as their forebears had been, saw that that vast map was useless, and not without some pitilessness was it that they delivered it up to the inclemencies of sun and winters. In the deserts of the West, still today, there are tattered ruins of that map, inhabited by animals and beggars. In all the land, there is no other relic of the disciplines of geography. And so there's something very fantastical about the way he writes. That this seems like a fantasy world, particularly a world where this life-size map is, or the remnants of this life-size map is all we have left of the disciplines of geography. But also just this idea of a map of an empire that is the size of the empire, which is, as accurate as you can get, I suppose, and yet is useless. I love those kind of paradoxes that often turn up in his work. This idea about the relationship between about what's created and what's real, and that can sort of then become a discussion about literature, about art. I I love how the way part of this sentence is constructed. So it says, in the deserts of the West, still today, are the tattered ruins of that map, inhabited by animals and beggars. Um, and with the way it's constructed, at least in this translation, it gets me wondering, with this being Borges, is it the deserts or is it the ruins of the map that are inhabited by animals and beggars? Possibly both. And again, that idea of almost a sort of a boundlessness of there being no boundaries, and yet it being told so economically, and yet also with a sort of flair of the fantastic to the whole thing. And so that's part of what I love about Borges, and I feel like that story does a great job of summing it up. It also then starts getting me to think about one of his earlier short stories, one of his most famous short stories, The Library of Babel, about a massive library that has potentially every single book that not only has been written but could be written. It has every word in every possible order, every possible spelling mistake, and any other sort of variation that's conceivable is there in the library. And the character there, he's saying that if all of these books are here, then surely it's not beyond the realms of possibility that a catalogue of all of these books exists. And so then there's a potential search for this catalogue, and yet it's a kind of almost hopeless task. The odds against you are almost, or practically are, insurmountable, and yet he keeps on going. And so yeah, that's another sort of great story of Borges that again is quite fantastical, and you can think about it in all kinds of wonderful ways. And so yeah, at some point, for over a year, maybe over 2 years, I've been meaning to make a video about my 10 favourite stories by Borges. So eventually I'll do that, so you can get a bit more of an idea about what he's like. Then I'll try and speed up for the rest of them. Number 2 is beauty in an opening line. I find this quite difficult particularly with like a novel, something that's more narrative based, as the kind of beauty I pick up on is, I don't know, it kind of slowly builds up inside me as I keep going. And so sometimes with the opening line of a novel or any work in prose, it's difficult for me to actually remember the first line. And often many of my favourite books, the first line itself is pretty unassuming. So I had to turn to poetry for this one. And when I think of an opening line, this is the one that I go to. It's T.S. Eliot, and it's his early poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. And I'll read the first 3 lines because I think they're just some of the best, and it's a really wonderful, memorable opening. And so the first line is, let us go then, you and I, which has a wonderful feeling of openness. Is it him, the poet, speaking to me, the reader? Is it 2 characters inside the world of the poem? But it has this openness, this potentiality, this feeling of stepping out, and the world is, all open in front of you. So let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky. So line 2, kind of carrying on with that feeling. We have this nice big open sky, it's night time. So when the evening is spread out against the sky, and how, line 3, like a patient etherized upon a table. So we've got, let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. And it goes on. But that's just so wonderful. That image is so unexpected and yet so perfect as well for that leadenness, I suppose, of night, that sort of association of darkness and sleep, of, a kind of maybe even something phantasmagoric as well with the ether. I just love that opening, and have done since I first came across it. Number three, beauty in character. Again, one I found a little difficult, maybe something that I'm beginning to understand about myself as a reader, is I'm not always the kind of reader who's going to latch on to a particular character and sort of get a lot of meaning, or I don't know. I'm not going to get as much out of individual characters in a book necessarily. It's not something that resonates as deeply with me. I don't know. There's something more about the ensemble and how everything all gels together for me. And so I had to do a bit of thinking. But the last time where I finished a book, or a group of books, and there was one particular character who stood out, was when I was reading the Earthsea books, and it's the character Tenar, who we meet when she's really young, and she just has this wonderful, just this really wonderful development. She starts off as a priestess in a cult, on this sort of faraway island, and she's performing all of these strange rites, but she's also being used by a lot of the people in the background, and also, it's a bit of an odd situation, and it's kind of creepy, and she has to make some really difficult choices there, and she's eventually sort of freed from that life, by sort of the other main character in the series, Ged, and then she sort of gets out of there, and then we don't see her for a while. She's sort of mentioned in the next book, and then once we get back to her character, it's years and years later, and she's grown up, and she's had a life, and it's very, whereas the glimpse we had of her earlier life is much more adventurous. There's magic, there's strange rituals, there are strange catacombs and sort of labyrinthine tunnels under this island that she's on. When we meet her later on, it's very much normal life. It's family, or sort of community squabbles. It's about eking out a normal life, and yet she seems to have grown so much as a character, and there's something really, I think, just really sort of generous about her as a character. And so, but by the end of that book, she was a character that I really found myself, feeling a lot for, and it was quite incredible that someone who you meet as a young girl in one book doesn't show up in the next book, and then you meet later, and slowly the gaps are filled in, and yet suddenly, there it all is. It's a life, and somehow that life really resonates with you as a reader. I'm not sure if I'm doing a really good job of summing that up. That was the last time a particular character really resonated with me in that kind of way. Number four is beauty amidst pain. And for this one, I was thinking of some of the stories in Going to Meet the Man in James Baldwin, and that there are so many ways that in this collection there are examples of that I'm not sure, he's describing these very painful, very difficult, very complicated situations. And it's often people discovering or just reflecting on very complicated and painful um, parts of their own life, and sort of realizing maybe how difficult their life is. So, particularly, I think I've talked about them before, like Sonny's Blues, about two brothers, one of whom is a drug addict, but he's also a jazz musician, and he finds music and is able to take his pain and turn it into something really, really beautiful. And the way Baldwin is able to communicate that is just really, really wonderful. And again, I think it's that he's able to write about these really painful moments, or sometimes profound moments, but often tinged with melancholy or just with a kind of weight. He's able to convey this with such beautiful and dignified language. And so I think most of the beauty there is the way he's saying it, no matter how painful it is. And also this evening, so soon as well, about a man. He's black. He's from America, has moved to Paris, made some money, sort of, and then gone back to America, and then eventually realised his life's in Paris. Then gone back to Paris, made loads of money, sort of become a star as a singer and as an actor, and now because he's sort of made a name for himself, he's going back to America, and it's him realizing just how free, sort of relatively speaking, he is in Paris, and then how differently he's seen in the US, and it's a really painful realization that just sort of creeps up and becomes more and more intense as the story goes on, but done really, really well, really poignantly, and really beautifully. Then number 5 is Beauty in Incompleteness. And with this, I couldn't help thinking of the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, one of the Romantic poets. And it's one of the sad things about his life, really, is that he was insanely talented and really, really clever, and yet there's so much of his work that he just left unfinished, or he was unable to finish. And then as he got older, I think he was just finding it increasingly difficult to write poetry. And this, some of his most famous poems are fragments or works he never finished, and yet they're so brilliant, they're still read and enjoyed. There's Kubla Khan, probably one of the best poems ever written in English. And then Christabel as well, a great Gothic sort of narrative ballad. I'm sure it must have at least been slightly in the back of Sheridan Le Fanu's head when he wrote Camilla. I'm almost certain. And there in this selection of his poems, there are loads of just really beautiful little fragments that seem to get shorter and shorter as he's finding it more difficult to write. And there's this one that I really like called A Dark Sky, and it's just 11 lines long, and it's hard to say if he ever finished it or whether he what he really meant for it. But this is it. This is A Dark Sky. The stars that want to start, as on a chase, mid twinkling insult on heaven's darkened face, like a convened conspiracy of spies, wink at each other with confiding eyes. Turn from the portent, all is blank on high. No constellations alphabet the sky. The heavens one large black letter only show, and as a child beneath its master's blow shrills out of want its task and it's a fright. The groaning world now learns to read aright, and with its voice of voices cries out, oh. Yeah, just wonderful. Just it gets quite bleak towards the end, and yet, yeah, I just love it. So, I think Coleridge is really the one writer I think of when it comes to beauty in incompleteness. In the introduction to that selection, the editor, what's the editor there called? Richard Holmes. I think he compares the fragments to the follies that people were building on their estates at around the same period, in this romantic period. So these buildings that are made to look like old castle towers or old abbeys or old churches, but they've sort of crumbled into decay, only they haven't, they're brand new. And there's a sort of similarity between them and some of Coleridge's fragments. There's something very romantic in that. Moving on then, number 6 is beauty in place. For that, I was thinking of the house. The house, is it with the mezzanine? Let me double check that. Yeah, The House with the Mezzanine by Anton Chekhov. Like many of Chekhov's short stories, it's full of very complex, maybe not very complex, but almost contradictory emotions. There's a lot of love and joy and happiness, but also frustration and sometimes depression. It's just when I think of this story, I think of the setting. It's set in the countryside, and it's about, I think, one guy staying in one house, befriending some people who are living out in another house, and he'll sort of walk across the fields and through the meadows to go see them, and it's summer and it's wonderful, and the way this landscape, and the way the main character feels in this landscape, it's just evoked so wonderfully, and just sort of reminds me of being in certain places and these sort of just lovely summer evenings where almost no matter what happens, everything just feels wonderful, just because of how beautiful the night is. Yeah, I think for a sense of place, and for a sense of not only beauty in how the place is evoked, but also a sense in appreciating the beauty of the place and of the moment that you're there. I think that The House with the Mezzanine is one that really stands out for me. And then next up, we've got Beauty in Time. And I feel like, oops, oh dear, just dropping things all over the place. With this one, I have to go with Remembrance of Things Past, or In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust, which is all about time. It's all about sort of weighing up a life of sort of how you see the past, I suppose. And I think I do prefer the more modern title, In Search of Lost Time, because this concept of lost time sort of becomes so important as it goes on, and how it sort of it's the sort of impermanency, but also the way that you're able to still sort of bring it back. It feels so present. Again, like Borges, is a kind of paradox going on there. And I'm doing a terrible job of explaining exactly what it is. But I think it is almost a sense of nostalgia, and how it is, and how, you haven't, as a reader, you haven't shared what the protagonist in these books has shared, and yet you can still relate to it, and you can sort of contrast it with your own life. I think the other thing that he does really well, and a book that's this big, sort of has to do well, is the way that he's able to um, the way that he sort of deals with the passage of time, and the way that you as a reader are experiencing time um, as you're reading it. And so sometimes it slows down and stretches, and then sometimes suddenly different moments are sort of folded into each other, and it's just a wonderful way of experiencing time, and gets you thinking, I suppose, about how um, yeah, about how time works in a novel. Um, how quickly is it sort of really going? And then you have sort of questions of whether things are working chronologically or not as well. Again, I'm doing a terrible job of explaining what it is I love about it, but it would have to be Proust for a book with beauty in time. And then finally, beauty in catharsis. To have a book to hold up, but with this, it would be King Lear by Shakespeare. Um, Not only for um, the sort of brutality and the extreme emotion that's found in the play, um, but also I think for the way that that's reflected in the language itself. And just on a language basis, it's Shakespeare's, I think, most brutal, most elemental play. Um, and just on that basis of language, it is quite cathartic. As a reader, you feel like you've been through a lot, and yet there's this. I don't know. You do feel this kind of uplift as you're reading it and as you get to the end of it. And so yeah, for finding a sense of beauty in catharsis, I'd go with King Lear by Shakespeare. And there we go. That is the beauty in books tag. And I'd be very intrigued to hear what some of your answers would be to this. So if you'd like to let me know, whether in the comments or in a video of your own, then please feel free to. But for now, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.